A simple game in the park. The sun shone brightly over Cherry Grove Park, casting a golden glow over the children playing on the playground. Laughter rang out as Amber Gerwig, a lively 9-year-old with braids swinging behind her, dashed across the playground. Her pink sneakers left small impressions in the wood chips as she ran, laughing and glancing over her shoulder at her friends. She was playing tag with her best friends, Emma and Jack, their giggles blending with hers as they chased her across the playground. "You can't catch me," Amber shouted, her eyes gleaming with excitement as she weaved around the swings and dodged climbers. Emma's ponytail bobbed as she ran, stretching out her hand to tag Amber. "Oh, just you wait," Emma called, breathless but determined. Jack, a sturdy boy with a faded Superman shirt, joined in. He stretched out his arms, almost reaching Amber. "I'm going to be the first to catch you," he called, his eyes set with fierce determination. Officer Camila Mendez, an officer with several years of experience in the local police department, watched from her patrol spot at the edge of the park. Her job involved keeping an eye on the neighborhood parks, ensuring safety and keeping order. She observed the children playing, and her attention was drawn to Amber's lively movements. Something about the scene stirred an uneasy feeling in her, a feeling she couldn't quite place, but one that made her shoulders tense and her fingers twitch. Amber was running, laughing, unaware of anything but the joy of the game. Yet to Officer Mendez, there was something unsettling about her high-energy play. Camila's hand instinctively rested on her belt, her fingers drumming as she made a decision. She left her patrol spot, her boots crunching the wood chips as she walked across the playground toward Amber. Amber didn't notice the officer approaching until a shadow fell over her. Before she could react, Officer Mendez grabbed her arm, pulling her to an abrupt stop. Amber stumbled slightly, her laughter fading as she looked up at the officer's stern expression. "What do you think you're doing?" Camila demanded, her voice cold, her grip firm. Amber's arm hurt, and her face fell as she looked up at the officer, confused. I'm just playing tag with my friends," Amber stammered, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She glanced over at Emma and Jack, who had stopped in their tracks, looking just as stunned as she felt. Emma ran up, her voice trembling with panic. "Officer, she's our friend. We play here all the time. She didn't do anything wrong." Jack joined in, his face red from running. "Yeah, we're just playing tag. We're here every day after school." But Camila didn't let go. "I have to consider the safety of everyone here," she said sharply. Her grip on Amber's arm tightened, leaving small white marks on the girl's skin. She turned to pull Amber away from the playground and toward her squad car. "Please, let me go," Amber cried, her voice cracking as tears began to stream down her cheeks. She didn't understand what was happening. One moment, she had been laughing with her friends, and now she was being dragged away as if she'd done something wrong. Ignoring her cries, Camila marched Amber toward the car, her stern demeanor unshaken. Behind them, Emma and Jack exchanged horrified looks. Amber's friends couldn't stand by and watch their friend being taken away. They turned and ran as fast as they could, feet pounding against the pavement as they rushed to get help from the only person who might be able to do something about this: Amber's dad. The father's concern. After getting home from work that afternoon, Daniel Gerwig, Amber's father, had just settled down with a cup of coffee when he heard the frantic ringing of his doorbell. His heart sank as he saw the panicked faces of Emma and Jack standing on his porch. "Mr. Gerwig," Emma cried, her face flushed and eyes wide with fear. "A police officer took Amber. She didn't do anything wrong, I swear." Jack nodded vigorously, his eyes filling with tears. "We were just playing tag like we always do. The officer wouldn't listen to us." Daniel's face darkened as he processed their words. As the police chief, he knew the importance of maintaining order, but he also knew how quickly things could go wrong when authority was misused. Clutching his car keys, he reassured the children. "Thank you for coming to get me. I'll go and find her right now." He moved with purpose to his car, the weight of both his role as Amber's father and his duty as the chief of police settling on his shoulders. A father's determination. Daniel Gerwig, chief of the city's police department, felt his heart clench as he pulled up to Cherry Grove Park. He parked hastily and stepped out, his tall, broad frame casting a shadow over the curve as he scanned the area for his daughter. His usually calm demeanor was shattered by the urgency of the situation and the unsettling reports from Emma and Jack. How could someone on his team, a trusted officer, think it was acceptable to detain his 9-year-old daughter while she was simply playing in the park? The playground was eerily quiet now, the usual laughter and chatter replaced by the murmur of concerned onlookers who had gathered around the parked police car. In the back seat, Daniel caught sight of a familiar face through the glass. Amber's tear-streaked cheeks and frightened eyes met his own, and he could see her little hands pressed against the window. His heart broke a little at the sight, but his focus shifted swiftly to the officer standing next to the squad car. Officer Camila Mendez, her face blank and unreadable, was holding a notebook and jotting something down. When she looked up and saw Daniel approaching, her face registered a brief flicker of surprise and unease, but she quickly composed herself, as if ready to justify her actions. "Chief Gerwig," she stammered, momentarily at a loss for words. "I didn't." "What were you thinking, Officer Mendez?" Daniel's voice was firm, his expression steely as he cut her off. "This is my daughter. Explain to me why she's in the back of your squad car, frightened and in tears." The weight of his words, delivered in the crisp, no-nonsense tone that came naturally to him as chief, seemed to sink heavily into Camila. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing from Daniel's intimidating stance to Amber in the backseat, and then back to her notebook. She looked like she was grasping for words that wouldn't come. "Sir, I noticed suspicious behavior," she started, her voice faltering as she realized how little sense it made. "There were other children around, and I just thought. There was some concern about safety." She glanced away, unable to meet his piercing gaze. "Concern about safety?" Daniel's voice was sharp, barely containing his anger. "For whom, exactly?" Amber was playing with her friends, the same way she does every day after school. "Her friends came to my house, terrified, to tell me what you had done. So again, I'm asking, what did you see that warranted this?" Camila's face flushed, and she tried to regain her composure. I was patrolling, as usual. There was a report of some disturbances in the area last week. I was simply being vigilant, sir." Daniel took a deep breath, struggling to maintain his calm. He didn't want to make a public scene, but this was his daughter, and the situation called for accountability. "Did Amber do anything wrong, Officer Mendez?" he asked, his voice dropping to a chilling calm. "No, Chief," she admitted, her eyes dropping to the ground, her face a mask of discomfort. I made a mistake." Daniel studied her, anger giving way to disappointment. He looked past her to the other parents and children who had gathered nearby, their expressions a mixture of confusion and judgment. He turned back to Camila. "Officer Mendez, release my daughter now," he commanded. She nodded, fumbling with the keys before she hurried to the back of the car, unlocking the door and gently guiding Amber out. Amber ran to her father immediately, clinging to him tightly, her body still shaking slightly from the ordeal. Daniel knelt down to Amber's level, smoothing her braids and looking into her eyes. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked softly. Amber nodded, but her eyes were still watery, and her little hand clung tightly to his shirt. "I don't know why she took me, Daddy. I was just playing." Daniel hugged her tightly, swallowing back the frustration boiling inside him. "I know, Amber. You did nothing wrong." As he stood up, holding Amber close, he fixed his gaze back on Officer Mendez, who seemed unsure of where to look. Her hands were clenched around her notebook, and she had that unmistakable look of regret, though Daniel couldn't decide if it was because she had made a mistake or because of the consequences that now loomed over her. "This type of behavior, Officer Mendez, is not what we stand for. We are here to protect the people of this community, not to traumatize them. And we certainly don't profile children. Camila shifted her weight awkwardly, unable to hide her embarrassment. I'm truly sorry, Chief Jerwick. I was only trying to do my job. Your job. Daniel's tone was sharper. Your job is to serve and protect, not to let fear and assumptions drive your actions. You owe my daughter an apology. Camila's face flushed with shame. She turned to Amber, who was watching her with wide, cautious eyes, and said, Amber, I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. Amber looked up at her father, unsure of how to respond. Daniel gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. It's okay, Amber. She needs to hear that she made you feel afraid. She needs to understand. Amber took a deep breath and looked up at Camila. You didn't listen to me, or my friends, she said, her young voice trembling slightly. We told you we were just playing, but you wouldn't let me go. Camila nodded, her expression filled with remorse. I know, Amber, and I'm sorry. I promise I'll listen better next time. But the ordeal was far from over. Just as Daniel was about to take Amber's hand and walk away, Camila's phone buzzed. She glanced down at the screen, her face suddenly drained of color. Her hand shook slightly as she held the phone to her ear. Hello. Yes, this is Officer Mendez. Her voice trailed off, and Daniel noticed a flash of panic in her eyes. What? She stammered, her face pale with shock. No, he was supposed to be. He was there this morning. How can he just be gone? Daniel's brow furrowed. He could hear faint, distressed voices coming from the phone, and Camila's face continued to twist with worry as she listened. She covered her mouth with her hand, her voice breaking as she whispered, It's my son, Arthur. He's missing from school. In an instant, the situation shifted. The authoritative officer who had wrongfully detained Amber now stood before him, a mother on the edge of panic. The stern, unwavering demeanor had crumbled, replaced by raw vulnerability and fear. She looked at Daniel, her eyes wide with terror. Chief, please, I know what I did was wrong, and I know I don't deserve your help, but my son, he's only 5. Please, he's all I have. Daniel took a steadying breath, still holding Amber's hand. The protective instinct inside him, the one that had driven him to come here in the first place, now extended toward Camila. She was in trouble, and despite her actions earlier, he couldn't ignore her plea. He was a father, too. All right, he said, his voice calm but resolute. We're going to find him. I'll help you. Let's go. A look of disbelief crossed her face. You'll help me? Yes, because right now, this is bigger than any of us. But I expect you to understand the weight of what happened here today. He paused, looking down at Amber, who was watching the entire scene unfold with a mixture of curiosity and empathy. And I expect you to remember what you learned here, Camila. Without another word, Daniel pulled out his phone and began dialing his department. He'd need all available officers to assist in the search for Arthur, and every moment was crucial. A race against time. As Daniel coordinated with the department over the phone, Camila stood by, her gaze unfocused, lost in a whirlwind of fear and guilt. Her son Arthur was only 5 years old, a gentle boy with a love for dinosaurs and a bright smile that could melt even the toughest heart. The mere thought of him lost and alone gnawed at her, and the cold spring air seemed to sting her skin in a way she hadn't felt before. Amber, still holding tightly to her father's hand, looked up at Camila, her young face softening with empathy. Despite the fear and confusion she had endured, she could see the pain in Camila's eyes and understand, in her own way, that this was something bigger than a mistake in the park. Dad, Amber whispered, tugging on Daniel's hand. Can we help her? I mean, really help her. Daniel looked down at his daughter, his heart swelling with pride at her compassion, even after what she had been through. He gave her a reassuring nod and knelt down to her level. We're going to help find him, Amber. But I need you to stay close to me and listen carefully, okay? Amber nodded seriously, her grip on his hand firm. Daniel straightened up and turned to Camila, his voice filled with the calm authority of years in law enforcement. Let's start at his school. That's the last place he was seen, correct? Camila nodded, her voice shaky but determined. Yes. The teacher said he was there this morning, but after recess, he was nowhere to be found. They've checked the classrooms, the hallways, even the storage closets. Daniel signaled for Camila to follow him. Come on. We'll take my car and coordinate with the rest of the department on the way. Without hesitation, they climbed into his squad car, Amber buckled in the backseat. As they drove, Daniel kept one hand on the wheel and used the other to continue coordinating with officers. He issued instructions, organizing a perimeter around the school and designating search teams to cover nearby parks, alleys, and businesses. The entire time, Camila's hands remained clasped tightly in her lap, her fingers trembling. She took deep breaths, willing herself to stay calm and collected. She couldn't afford to fall apart, not while her son was out there somewhere, frightened and alone. Can you tell me about Arthur? Daniel asked, his tone gentler, the question seeming to surprise her. Anything that might help us understand where he could go. Camila swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on the dashboard. He's a curious boy, always asking questions, always wanting to explore. He loves the park with the pond near our house. There's a group of ducks there he's named, and he insists on feeding them whenever he can. Daniel absorbed this, nodding. All right. I've got officers checking the parks nearby, including that one. Is there anywhere else he likes to go? Maybe a friend's house, a familiar place. She blinked back tears, her voice barely a whisper. There's a small library down the street. He loves story time there. And he loves the corner store with the big stuffed bear by the window. We go there for ice cream after school sometimes. Daniel noted the details, issuing orders to have those areas checked immediately. Camila's gaze remained distant, her mind replaying memories of her son's joyful face at each of those places, memories that seemed to sharpen the edges of her pain. She felt raw, exposed, and utterly vulnerable, each moment that passed deepening her fear. As they approached the school, Amber's voice piped up from the backseat. Mom says that sometimes, when I feel lost, I should close my eyes and think of something that makes me happy. She looked at Camila with a soft, understanding expression. Maybe Arthur went somewhere that makes him feel safe. Camila's eyes softened as she looked back at Amber, gratitude mingling with the guilt she felt over their earlier encounter. She took a deep breath and nodded, forcing herself to think clearly, to focus on the task at hand. Thank you, Amber, she murmured, her voice steadier. They pulled up to the elementary school, where a small crowd of teachers and staff had gathered near the entrance, their faces filled with concern. Daniel parked quickly, and they stepped out, making their way to the school's principal, a tall woman with short curly hair and a calm, composed expression that faltered slightly upon seeing the distress etched on Camila's face. Officer Mendes, Chief Turwig, the principal, greeted them. We've searched every corner of the school, but we haven't found any trace of Arthur. We're doing everything we can to help. Daniel nodded. Thank you, Principal Harris. We've got additional search teams covering the area around the school, but we'll need your cooperation. Has anyone noticed anything unusual? Any unfamiliar faces around the school recently? The principal shook her head. No, nothing like that. It's been a normal day, as far as I'm aware. Arthur was with his class during morning activities, and his teacher says he was present at recess. But after that, he just vanished. Camila's face grew pale, and she took a shaky breath. Did he seem upset or distracted this morning? Was there anything that could have made him wander off? The principal exchanged a sympathetic look with the teacher standing nearby. Not that we noticed. Arthur seemed happy, especially after showing everyone his new water bottle. It has little rocket ships on it. Camilla closed her eyes, pain and worry etched across her face. She knew how much Arthur loved that water bottle. It had been a reward for his good behavior at school last month, and he carried it with him everywhere. "We'll do everything we can," Daniel reassured her. He signaled to a few officers who had gathered near the entrance, organizing them into smaller groups to continue the search around the school grounds and nearby streets. As the search teams fanned out, Camilla and Daniel joined the teachers in scouring the playground, checking every corner, every hiding spot, calling out Arthur's name. The minutes stretched on, each one heavier than the last as they combed through every possible area. Camilla's shoulders slumped under the weight of growing despair as she called her son's name over and over, her voice growing hoarse. Just as they were preparing to search the surrounding streets again, Daniel's radio crackled with a voice that made everyone freeze. "Chief Kerwig, we found something." It was Officer Riley, one of Daniel's trusted team members. It's Arthur's water bottle. We found it at the park down the road, near the pond." Camilla's eyes widened, and without a word, she broke into a sprint toward Daniel's car, her breath hitching in her throat as she fought to hold back tears. Daniel quickly followed her, signaling to the other officers to regroup at the park. He could feel his own heart racing, the tension building with each step. He glanced over at Amber, who was watching the scene with wide, anxious eyes. "Hang tight, Amber," he said, giving her a reassuring nod before climbing back into the car. "We're going to find him." As they sped toward the park, Camilla clutched her seat, her fingers digging into the fabric as she stared out the window, silently praying that her son was safe. The sight of his water bottle filled her with equal parts relief and dread. It meant he had been there, but it also meant he was out there somewhere, alone and likely terrified. When they arrived, Officer Riley was waiting near the entrance of the park, holding the distinctive blue water bottle decorated with rocket ship stickers. He handed it to Camilla, his expression somber. "It was lying just off the path near the pond," he explained. "There's no sign of him, but we're expanding the search area." Camilla's fingers shook as she held the bottle, her mind racing with worry. She tried to focus, to think logically, but her emotions felt like a tidal wave, threatening to pull her under. She turned to Daniel, her eyes filled with desperation. "Where could he be, Chief? He loves this park. He'd never just leave his bottle behind." Daniel placed a steady hand on her shoulder, his gaze firm and reassuring. "We're going to find him, Camilla. This is a good sign. It means we're close." Together, they joined the officers in combing through the park, calling Arthur's name as they checked behind trees, under benches, and near the pond's edge. The sun was beginning to dip lower, casting long shadows across the park as the search intensified. Amber, who had followed closely beside her father, suddenly tugged on his sleeve. "Dad, maybe Arthur got scared and hid somewhere. When I get scared, I like to hide too." Daniel looked down at her, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. "You might be right, Amber." He turned to the other officers, raising his voice. "Everyone, spread out. Focus on hiding spots, any small spaces a child might go to if they were frightened." As they continued the search with renewed focus, Camilla's heart raced, her hope fragile but persistent. She could feel the weight of guilt pressing down on her, mingling with the overwhelming worry for her son's safety. Every tree, every bush felt like it held her worst fears. And then, just as the last rays of sunlight cast a soft glow over the park, a faint sound reached her ears, a soft whimpering coming from a thicket near the pond's edge. She ran toward the sound, her heart pounding, barely daring to hope. The breaking point, Camilla reached the dense thicket by the pond, the leaves rustling softly as she pushed through. The whimpering grew louder, blending with the gentle murmur of the pond and the evening breeze. Her heart pounded as she scanned the shadows, desperately hoping the sound would lead her to Arthur. Finally, through a small gap in the branches, she caught sight of a small figure huddled between the bushes and a fallen tree. It was Arthur, his familiar mop of curls wild and tangled, his face streaked with tears as he clutched his knees tightly to his chest. "Arthur," she cried, her voice catching in her throat as she stumbled forward. Relief and fear flooded over her in equal measure as she dropped to her knees beside him. "Arthur, sweetheart, it's Mommy. I'm here." The boy looked up, his wide, tearful eyes meeting hers with a mixture of recognition and fear. But instead of running into her arms as she expected, he recoiled slightly, pressing himself further into the leaves and dirt. The reaction stung, slicing through her heart as she realized that her son, her own child, was afraid of her. "Arthur, it's okay," she whispered, reaching out with a gentle hand. "It's just me. I'm here to take you home." Daniel and Amber had followed close behind, and they came to a stop just a few feet away, watching the scene unfold. Amber's small hand slipped into her father's as she observed Arthur with a look of deep empathy, sensing the boy's fear. "Is he scared of her?" Amber whispered to Daniel, her young voice tinged with sadness. Daniel gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Sometimes people get scared even when they're safe," he replied quietly. "It's okay. Let's give them a moment." Camilla's voice wavered as she continued to speak to Arthur, her heart aching with every second that he didn't move toward her. "Arthur, I was so worried about you. Can you come to me, honey? Please." Arthur's tiny voice finally broke the silence, wavering and full of emotion. "Mommy, are you mad at me?" Camilla's face softened, tears brimming in her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, no. I'm not mad at you at all. I was just so scared when I couldn't find you. I love you so much, Arthur. Please come to me." He hesitated, his small fingers clutching at the grass around him. "I didn't mean to make you scared, Mommy. I wanted to play with the ducks, but then I thought you wouldn't want me to." Candila's heart broke at the words, the raw innocence in his voice slicing through her guilt. She shook her head, her voice choked. "Arthur, you don't have to be afraid of what I think. I'm here to take care of you, to protect you. I love you no matter what." Arthur's eyes lingered on her face, searching for reassurance, and slowly he crawled toward her, allowing her to scoop him into her arms. Camilla held him close, the warmth of his small body a comfort she hadn't realized she'd been missing until now. Watching the reunion, Daniel felt a surge of relief. Yet he knew this moment was only the beginning of what Camilla would have to reckon with, both as a mother and as an officer. He approached them cautiously, giving Camilla a respectful nod. "We should get him home, Camilla. He's been through a lot today." Camilla nodded, her arms still wrapped protectively around her son. "Thank you, Chief. And Amber, thank you for helping, sweetie." Amber stepped forward, giving Arthur a small, shy smile. "It's okay, Arthur. I was scared too, but my dad always says that being brave means doing things even when we're scared." Arthur sniffled, nodding solemnly. "Thank you," he whispered, looking at Amber with a hint of admiration in his young eyes. As they made their way back to the car, Camilla stayed close to Arthur, holding his hand tightly, as if afraid he might disappear again. Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders, the lingering shame and regret clouding her every step. Once they were all in the car, he turned to her, his voice gentle but firm. "Camilla, you know this has to be addressed. Today could have ended very differently. For Amber, for you, for Arthur." She nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on her son in the rearview mirror, who was leaning against the window, exhausted. "I know, Chief. I lost sight of everything that mattered. I can't believe I let my own fears control me like that." Daniel's gaze softened. Fear can be a powerful thing, but you have to recognize when it's clouding your judgment. That's especially true when you're responsible for the well-being of others. Today, you let it get the better of you, and it almost cost you more than you could handle. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she quickly wiped them away. "I've tried so hard to be a good officer, but I lost sight of the most important part of the job: compassion. I forgot what it means to see the world through someone else's eyes, and my son ended up being the one to remind me of that. Daniel's expression remained solemn as he nodded. Learning the hard way isn't easy, but it's also the most valuable. You're going to have to answer for your actions, but the important thing now is that you take responsibility and work to change. For Arthur's sake and for yours. Camilla took a deep, shuddering breath. She looked back at Amber and Arthur, their innocent faces illuminated by the glow of the streetlights as they neared her home. I will, Chief. I don't want to be the kind of person Arthur can't be proud of. Today showed me that. They arrived at Camilla's house, a modest 2-story home with a small front yard adorned with Arthur's toys scattered across the lawn. Daniel parked the car, and they all stepped out, with Amber helping Arthur untangle himself from his seatbelt. The 2 children exchanged shy smiles, and Amber reached out to give Arthur's hand a reassuring squeeze. "Bye, Arthur," she said softly. "I'm glad you're safe." Arthur gave a small nod, and a smile broke across his face. "Bye, Amber. Thank you for helping me." Camilla's heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and sadness. Watching Amber's compassion and kindness, she realized just how much her own actions had affected the children. She took a deep breath, knowing she owed them more than words. Daniel placed a hand on Camilla's shoulder. "Take care of him, Camilla, and take some time to reflect. This is your chance to turn things around." Camilla nodded, her gaze lingering on Amber for a moment. "Thank you, Chief. And thank you, Amber. I'll make sure this doesn't happen again." With that, she took Arthur's hand, guiding him inside, her heart heavy but hopeful. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to become the mother and officer her son deserved. As Daniel and Amber drove home, the weight of the day slowly lifted, leaving a quiet sense of resolution in its wake. Amber looked up at her father, her eyes shining with admiration. "Dad, you did a good thing today," she said softly. Daniel gave her a warm smile, his heart swelling with pride for his daughter. Sometimes helping people means holding them accountable. And sometimes it just means showing a little kindness like you did. Amber beamed, leaning back in her seat with a content sigh. As they drove into the dusk, the sense of hope and healing lingered, a testament to the power of compassion and the strength of family. Facing the consequences. The morning after finding Arthur, Camilla arrived at the precinct, feeling the full weight of the previous day's events pressing on her shoulders. As she entered the building, her colleagues cast curious glances her way, whispers echoing faintly in the corridors. She had barely slept, replaying her actions over and over, the look on Amber's face, and the hurt in her son's eyes flashing in her mind like a haunting slideshow. She knew there was no running from what had happened. Today, she would face the consequences. Daniel was waiting for her in his office, his expression serious but not unkind. He motioned for her to sit, and she sank into the chair across from his desk, hands folded tightly in her lap. For a moment, there was only silence, and the hum of the building felt unnaturally loud in her ears. "Camilla," he began, his tone both stern and empathetic, "we need to have a serious conversation about what happened yesterday." She nodded, her gaze fixed on her hands. "I know, Chief. I let my personal biases and fears cloud my judgment. I put a child through something traumatic, and I can't take that back." Daniel leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. "It wasn't just any child, Camilla. It was my daughter, but it could have been anyone's. What concerns me most is that someone in your position, a trusted officer, allowed fear and assumption to override training and compassion. Our job is to protect the community, not act on personal prejudices." She swallowed hard, feeling the sting of his words but recognizing the truth in them. "I wish I could go back and change things. I was wrong, and I'm ashamed of what I did. I understand if there are consequences." Daniel's gaze softened slightly. "I know you're aware of the gravity of what happened, but this isn't just about punishment. It's about change, about ensuring this never happens again. Not to Amber, not to Arthur, and not to anyone else. He paused, letting his words sink in. After discussing it with the department, we've decided to put you on a temporary suspension. During that time, you'll be required to attend sensitivity training and counseling sessions. This isn't optional, Camila. It's mandatory. She nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and regret. I understand, Chief. I'll do whatever it takes. I want to make things right. Daniel's voice softened as he leaned back in his chair. Good. But remember, this isn't just about ticking boxes. You have to confront whatever led you to act the way you did, to acknowledge it, and work to overcome it. That's the only way you'll be able to earn back the trust of the community and of yourself. A flicker of determination sparked in Camila's eyes. She had spent years building her career, climbing the ranks, and priding herself on her dedication to her job. But in that single, thoughtless moment, she had thrown it all into jeopardy. I won't let you down, she said quietly, but with conviction. Daniel nodded, satisfied. I believe you, Camila. But this process won't be easy. Take the time to truly examine yourself, and don't shy away from the parts that are uncomfortable. As the meeting concluded, Camila felt a weight lifting slightly from her shoulders. She was grateful for the chance to make amends, but she knew this was only the beginning. As she left the office, she resolved to use this time to truly reflect and learn from her mistakes, no matter how painful that process might be. Over the next few days, Camila attended her first mandatory sensitivity training session. Sitting in a small room with other officers, she listened to speakers who shared their own stories, discussing biases, prejudice, and the importance of empathy in law enforcement. The discussion struck her deeply. She began to understand how she had allowed her own fear to manifest as judgment, and how her subconscious biases had affected her actions in ways she hadn't acknowledged before. As the sessions continued, Camila found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She realized that much of her behavior stemmed from experiences she had never truly dealt with. Growing up, she had faced her own set of challenges and traumas, which she had buried rather than addressed. Her prejudices and fears were products of those unhealed wounds, and confronting them now was a painful but necessary step toward healing. The counseling sessions were equally difficult. Camila worked with a therapist who challenged her to examine not only her actions, but the beliefs and insecurities that had driven them. She spoke of her fears, of the pressures of being an officer, and of the guilt she felt for her actions. Bit by bit, she began to unravel the layers of her own psyche, facing the parts of herself she had long ignored. It was during one of these sessions that she experienced a breakthrough. The therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Lawson, guided her through an exercise on empathy. Imagine yourself in Amber's shoes, Dr. Lawson said gently. You're a child, just playing in the park with your friends, when suddenly someone grabs you, accuses you, and treats you like a threat. Imagine the fear, the confusion. What would you feel? Camila closed her eyes, picturing the scene. Her chest tightened as she allowed herself to fully feel the experience from Amber's perspective. The helplessness, the fear, the feeling of being judged unfairly, all of it washed over her, and a fresh wave of remorse filled her heart. When she opened her eyes, she could barely contain the tears that threatened to spill. I didn't think about it that way. I just saw her, and I assumed. I let my own insecurities speak for me. Dr. Lawson nodded, her expression understanding. But now you're acknowledging it, and that's the first step toward growth. It's never easy to confront our own flaws, but it's the only way to change. Camila left that session feeling both emotionally drained and strangely hopeful. She had begun to see herself through a new lens, one that allowed her to recognize her own weaknesses, but also offered a path forward. She was determined to emerge from this experience a better person, not only for herself, but for those she had wronged. A few weeks into her suspension, Camila received a letter in the mail. She recognized the return address as belonging to Daniel's family, and her heart skipped a beat as she tore open the envelope. Inside, she found a letter from Amber, written in neat, careful handwriting. Dear Officer Mendez, I hope you're doing okay. I wanted to say thank you for helping find Arthur, and I forgive you for what happened. My dad says that we all make mistakes, and what's important is what we learn from them. I think you're a good person, and I hope you feel better soon. Sincerely, Amber. The words struck Camila with an unexpected intensity. Amber's simple, forgiving words were a balm to her wounded heart. She hadn't realized how much she needed that forgiveness, especially from the young girl she had wronged. With renewed determination, she continued her training and counseling, pouring herself into the process with an open heart. She wanted to be worthy of Amber's forgiveness and to prove to herself that she could be the kind of officer and mother that her son could look up to. By the end of her suspension, Camila had completed her training and counseling. She had faced her fears, acknowledged her flaws, and emerged with a newfound sense of clarity. The journey had been painful, but she knew it was only the beginning of a lifelong commitment to growth. When she returned to work, she was greeted by Daniel, who gave her a small nod of approval. She felt a sense of pride, tempered with humility, as she resumed her duties, this time with a heart more open and a spirit determined to act with empathy and fairness. And as she looked around the precinct, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced before. She knew that her role as an officer went beyond enforcing the law. It was about protecting, understanding, and serving her community with compassion. A new beginning and lasting redemption. Camila's first day back on the force brought a mixture of relief and apprehension. She was eager to return to her duties, but the weight of her past mistakes lingered in her mind. The precinct felt different. Her colleagues greeted her politely, yet there was an underlying tension. Some officers nodded with encouragement, but others cast her cautious glances, unsure of how to approach her. Camila understood that regaining her peers' trust would take time, but she was determined to prove that she had changed. As she settled into her office, she saw an email notification pop up on her computer screen. It was a message from Captain Rodriguez, congratulating her on her return and reminding her that she was assigned to oversee the newly established community outreach program. Camila felt a surge of both excitement and responsibility. The program, spearheaded by Daniel, was designed to build bridges between the police force and the local community, particularly underserved and minority neighborhoods. She couldn't think of a better way to redeem herself than by dedicating her time to a program that could help others feel seen, heard, and safe. Her first assignment was to organize a community meeting in Cherry Grove Park, the same park where her encounter with Amber had taken place. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she saw it as an opportunity to face her past mistakes directly. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and began planning the event. She drafted invitations for local families, community leaders, and business owners, and spent hours creating presentations on topics that would engage the public, from youth safety to open forums on policing. The day of the event arrived faster than she expected. The sun shone brightly, casting a warm glow over Cherry Grove Park. Families gathered on the grass, children played on the playground, and a food truck offered free ice cream and lemonade. Camila moved from group to group, greeting people warmly and doing her best to make them feel comfortable. She felt her nerves ease as she noticed genuine smiles and nods of encouragement from the community members. As the event continued, she saw Daniel arrive with Amber by his side. Amber beamed, holding a poster with a bright blue heart that read, "Welcome, Officer Mendez." Camila felt her eyes mist over as she approached them. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. She knelt down, looking Amber in the eyes. "And thank you for this. It means more than you know." Amber smiled shyly, glancing up at her dad. "I told Dad you're a good person. I believe you're going to help people, Officer Mendez, and I'm glad you're here." Camila smiled back, touched by the girl's words. "I'm going to try my best, Amber." Just then, Daniel gave a subtle nod, signaling that the main part of the program was ready to start. Camila stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady as she began speaking. Thank you all for being here today, she began, her gaze moving across the faces of families, children, and elders alike. This program is more than just a police initiative. It's a chance to rebuild trust, to open doors, and to listen. I want to acknowledge that I've made mistakes. I want to be honest with you all. There was a time not long ago when I allowed my own fears and assumptions to hurt someone. I can't undo what happened, but I can promise to work every day to make sure it doesn't happen again. A soft murmur moved through the crowd. Candela saw nods of understanding, with some community members giving her supportive smiles, while others seemed reserved, skeptical. She understood both reactions. Trust, she knew, was earned, not demanded. I'm here to listen to you today, she continued, to hear your concerns, your suggestions, and your stories. This program was created to ensure that we're building bridges, not walls. I hope you'll join me in making this community a safer, more compassionate place for everyone. The crowd broke into applause, and Camilla's heart lifted. Over the next few hours, she facilitated open discussions on safety, community projects, and youth programs, jotting down notes as people shared their thoughts and concerns. She listened intently to each person who spoke, their stories painting a picture of the challenges and hopes within their community. Toward the end of the meeting, a woman in her early 30s approached, holding her young son's hand. Camilla recognized her as Michelle, a local teacher who had been vocal about issues of bias and equity in the neighborhood. Officer Mendez, Michelle began, her voice calm but clear. I want to commend you for standing here and speaking openly about your mistakes. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong, and it's something many of us don't get to see in authority figures. Camilla nodded, feeling both grateful and humbled. Thank you, Michelle. I've learned a lot about courage through this experience. Sometimes, the hardest thing is facing yourself. Michelle's gaze softened as she looked down at her son, then back at Camilla. My son deserves to grow up in a world where he doesn't have to fear the people who are supposed to protect him. I hope you can help make that world possible. I'm committed to it, Camilla replied earnestly. I can't change the past, but I can work to build a future where every child feels safe, where they're seen and valued for who they are. With a nod, Michelle offered a small smile, and Camilla felt a warmth spreading through her chest. She knew there would still be people who would hesitate to trust her, and that was okay. She was prepared for the long road ahead, knowing that lasting change took time. After the event wrapped up, Camilla stayed behind to help clean up, gathering folding chairs and collecting leftover flyers. Just as she was finishing, she heard a familiar voice behind her. You did a good job today, Daniel said, his tone approving. Camilla turned to find him standing with Amber, who held a small bouquet of flowers. These are for you, Amber said, extending the bouquet with a shy smile. For being brave and helping people. Camilla knelt to accept the flowers, feeling a rush of gratitude. Thank you, Amber. You've taught me so much, and you've helped me see things in a way I never did before. Amber nodded, her smile wide. I'm glad, Officer Mendez. Maybe we can help each other. Daniel smiled, placing a hand on Amber's shoulder. You know, Camilla, he said thoughtfully, there's talk around the precinct about the impact this community outreach program is already making. People are paying attention. Camilla's expression brightened, though her voice remained humble. I'm just trying to do what's right. I want this community to know that they can trust us. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Camilla stood alongside Daniel and Amber, taking in the quiet beauty of the moment. The path ahead would be long and challenging, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose and a determination to see it through. In the days that followed, Camilla became a constant presence at community events, workshops, and town hall meetings. She didn't just attend, she participated, actively engaging with people, listening to their concerns, and working alongside them to find solutions. Over time, the skeptical glances faded, replaced by nods of acknowledgement, and even friendly waves. Her reputation shifted from that of an officer who had made a serious mistake to a figure who worked tirelessly to rebuild trust and foster unity. She knew she would never forget that fateful day at the park, nor would she forget Amber's words, which had stayed with her through every step of her journey. It was a lesson in humility, empathy, and growth, a reminder that change wasn't just about what you did for others, but also about the transformation within yourself. Months later, as she looked out over another community gathering in Cherry Grove Park, watching children play and families laugh together, Candela felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had come full circle, from a place of misjudgment and fear to one of understanding and genuine connection. As she saw Amber waving at her from across the park, Candela felt a renewed sense of purpose. She waved back, knowing that her journey wasn't just about one day or one event. It was a commitment to her community, to her family, and to herself, to be a better officer, a better mother, and a better person. And she was grateful for every step that had brought her here, knowing that the power of change lay in the choices she made each day forward.